Good afternoon, Namaskar. I, Kriti Vadhera, would like to welcome all the teachers, learners, educators, students to CIET NCERT's live phone-in program. And you are watching us live on PMeVIDYA's channel number 11. This session is for Standard 11 students. History is the subject what we are going to discuss next 1 hour for you. And we are joined by a very special guest. I would like to introduce Ms. Anjali Roy, PGT History. We welcome you, Ms. Roy, for today's session.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, students. Today we will study the Mesopotamian civilizations. But before we start, look at the map. Now, if you see, there were four civilizations.
Yes, correct. Ms. Roy,
existed.
Ms. Roy, before you just begin with the session, I would like to remind all my viewers here that in between this 1 hour intense session of history, if you have any questions, any suggestions, then please do let us know. You can dial on a number to tell us. Number would be 8800440559. And you're watching the live streaming of this program on NCERT's official YouTube channel by the name of NCERT Official. And there also in the live chat box, you may send all your suggestions and questions to us. Certainly, we will be taking all of your questions and we will have a discussion with our expert today. And one more medium to contact us, you can mail all your suggestions and questions to dth.class11@ciet.nic.in. So these are the various mediums to contact us, viewers and children. And here I feel really proud to announce that India assumed the G20 presidency for the first time in the country in 2023. A nation deeply committed to democracy and multilateralism, India's G20 presidency would be a watershed moment in its history, as it's going to play an important role by finding pragmatic global solutions. And by doing so, we are truly manifesting the true spirit of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, or the one is world family. So let us begin with today's history session. I welcome you again, Ms. Roy. So what are we going to discuss today in this session?
So we are going to study chapter 2 of class 11. This is writing. To understand that there were four civilizations which existed side by side in civilization. If you look at the map towards your right, you see China. There, the Chinese civilization existed in the yellow marked area, and that is the river Huanghe. Then comes the Indus Valley, actually the Harappan civilization, and it existed in the river Indus and its tributaries. We will study about the Harappan civilization in class 12. So it is important that you understand Mesopotamian civilization, and then you will be able to differentiate between the two civilizations when you go on to class 12. The third civilization is the Mesopotamian. This is what we will be studying today. Now the two rivers, the river valley, Tigris and river Euphrates, this is marked yellow. And then if you go towards the west, this is the Egypt, where the civilization existed around river Nile. Now let us learn about this civilization. The word Mesopotamia actually derives from Greek language, and it actually meant the area between the two rivers. And in this case, it is river Tigris and river Euphrates. Now, it is present day Iraq, and Sumerians were the first to establish the civilization, and hence it is also known as Sumerian civilization. In fact, the first known language was also Sumerian. Now, the most important difference between the Mesopotamian and Harappan is that the script of the Mesopotamian, the uniform script, has been deciphered. So we know a lot more about the Mesopotamian civilization, whereas Harappa, we are now dependent only on the archaeological remains. Now let us see the sources of study. Now there are a wide variety of sources which are available to us for the study of Mesopotamian civilization. There are buildings, there are ornaments, graves, tools, most importantly the seals which are a lot in number, and also there are thousands of written documents. Now, if you see this area, this I have picked up from the class 11th book only, so that you understand that what was the agriculturally productive area. The green marked portion is what was agriculturally very, very productive. Now, you see, in Mesopotamia, archaeology began in the 1840s. Why? Because the Europeans were very much excited to learn about the Mesopotamian civilization. There were references of it in the Old Testament, that is the first book of Bible. So thus initially, there was an emphasis on proving whatever was written in the Old Testament. Later on, of course, as the discoveries began, as the excavations began, as statues, ornaments, and written documents started to be excavated, you find that the historians largely depended on these.
Right. Um, Ms. Roy, here I would like to ask you something that we are discussing in detail about the Mesopotamian civilization. And as you
Yes.
discussed about the archaeology of the area also, can you please brief
Yes.
for all our learners and students who are watching us the geographical location and the condition of this civilization?
So if you see, like India, the Iraq, the present day Iraq, and of Mesopotamian civilization, it was also very diverse. So, if you see in the northeast, there were mountains, there was enough rainfall to grow crops. So, largely agriculture began earlier in this part. And when you see the north, you find, if you can locate Mari, I'm going to put my cursor here. This is Mari. This was the steppe region, and this is where pastoral life was there. And you find that here the people had better livelihood than agriculture in animal herding rather than in agriculture. But Mari proved to be, because our area of study is going to be Ur and Mari. We're going to see the town planning and how the extensive civilization was there. So here it became a trading town, and that's why Mari is important. Now, if you come to the east, you find that the tributaries of Tigris, they provided routes of communication, and from the mountains of Iran. So there was regular trade which was happening through these mountains. And when you come to the south, this is where Ur and Uruk. If you see, Ur and Uruk is towards the bottom, and you find these were actually desert land. And this is where the first cities came up, writing emerged, and the desert was there, but still it was very useful. Why? Because River Euphrates and Tigris, which rose from the northern mountains, they carried fine mud. And when they flooded, or when their water was let out on the fields, fertile silt was deposited. And that is why you find that the most fertile area was in this region. And you find when the city states began, it began largely here. Now let's come to the next slide. Now, if you see on the right side, this is a clay tablet because the Mesopotamians wrote on tablets made of clay. Then it was baked and it became as strong as the pottery. Now, if you see notice the pen with which they are writing. This is called the reed, and the cuneiform writing which they did. Now, for each transaction, whether it was for trade or whether it was an administrative document or an administrative record, these highly skilled writers had to finish writing and complete the tablet before the clay dried. So they were very well respected in society also, because you find that these writers, they had to memorize a lot. They had to be highly skilled to be able to finish writing the tablets before the clay dried.
Picture we are showing to all our viewers. So
Yes.
you're talking about the writers, the writing. So was the literacy actually widespread in this particular civilization?
No, unfortunately, it was not widespread. Now, why
Okay.
it was not widespread? Because there were hundreds of signs to learn, and many of these were very, very complex. So, writing was a skilled craft and it was an intellectual achievement. In fact, we have some tablets in which the kings are boasting about their ability to read and write. So yes, writing was not it was not, literacy was not very widespread, but we must not forget that because there were so many achievements in the field of astronomy and mathematics and geometry, so there were schools.
Okay.
Unfortunately, women were not allowed to attend these schools. Now, let me tell you about this. Now, this is from about 1100 BC. You know, the Assyrians established their kingdom in the north, and the region came to be known as Assyria. I have already mentioned that the language of the land was Sumerian by the first settlers. Now, I am just showing how the development of writing began in the various parts of the world, from Egypt to Mesopotamia to India. Remember, the script of Harappa has still not been deciphered. So we have an advantage for the Mesopotamian civilization because we know exactly who the rulers were, what kind of cities they lived in, what was the society, everything we know about it. Now, seals. Now, seals have been found in large numbers, and if you look at the cylindrical seals on your left, and there is also a flat seal. That is just a representation of the rolled out seal. Now, understand that this was a time when there were no proper boxes. How did people do trade then? The people traded in sacks. Now, how to keep those sacks, safe, the content safe.
Right.
So what they used to happen was that the mouth of the sack was tied, and on
Okay.
top of the rope, wet clay was put. And then these cylindrical seals were just rolled on top of the sack. And it led to a continuous picture. Now, from these flat seals, we come to know that the name and sender, the name of the sender, the where the goods were being sent, the name of that person, the contents of the box were written on these seals. So if that bag, if that sack arrived in to the sender with the seal intact, which meant that the contents have not been disturbed. You can understand this by the modern postal system. If you go to the post office, you can see that they have a wax like red colored wax, and on top of it, they put a seal to seal your official documents. There have been instances where shops have been sealed like that. So you can understand by that how the seals were extremely important. It showed that there was widespread trade. For trade to happen, it meant that there was surplus production. And that's how the urban cities came up. Now, let me go on to the first empire in Mesopotamia. Now, if you see that initially there were a large number of city-states which began. Now, these city-states were usually ruled by the chiefs, and they were usually very, very brave. They were usually somebody who would win the war. And why the war started was because they are in a continuous downturn terrain. So if the one on top used up more water, and if say for example the city below it did not receive water, there were bound to be wars, and that's how you see the wars began between each other for the control of resources. So initially they were all chieftains who warred between each other. There was no dynasty where the monarchical form of system whereby there was one family which was taking control of the region. But slowly, as time progressed, you find that I have given this image of Sargon of Akkad. This is around 2350 BCE. Now he took control of the region and he created the world's first empire. And several people, nations, or independent states were placed under the control of one ruler. So you find that this is the person who was able to unite to some extent some of the warring tribes. then the chieftains, in order to gain popularity, what they used to do was they used to distribute the spoils of the war. And that is how you see slavery began. That is how the warring the city state which was victorious. What it did was that they took the spoils from the defeated state, and they used to take women largely because they were able to increase their population, and slaves who were not treated well. Now, I wanted to show you this area. This is the Akkadian Empire. This lasted around 200 years. And you find that the gray area marks the probable conquests of Sargon. And according to the later traditions, you find that a large number of expeditions were conducted by him to expand his empire. Okay, this is the Babylonian Empire. Now they overtook Sumerians around 2000 BC, and they built capital Babylon on river Euphrates. Okay, I think I'm going to talk about Hammurabi. Hammurabi was the most famous king of Babylonian Empire, and you find that he is very, very famous because of the code of law. And it was usually the punishment was which fitted the crime, which means an eye for an eye, a hand for a hand. Now, what happens is that his code was a collection of 282 rules. He took all the laws of the region, the entire city states, and unified them into a code. This helped to unify the region. If you see this map, this is why I have included this map is to show you that how there was trade between Mesopotamia and Indus. And when you come to class 12, and when you are studying the Harappan civilization, you will see mentions of the Meluha, which was the ancient name for Harappan civilization.
Ms. Roy, now when we know about the geographical location also, the rulers also, and the way they were ruling, and you have already told about the literacy widespread, how it was just fixed with the classes. So here I really want to ask you about the religion. What was the religion they all were practicing?
Very interesting, very interesting. Now if you see the next part, I'm going to teach the religion, society and political life. Now let's come to religion. If you see the top left, you will see that this is known as ziggurat. Now, these were large temples which were dedicated to the god of the city. Now, the most interesting thing is that the religion was polytheistic, which means that there was no one god. There were multiple gods. In fact, it is said that there were about 300 gods and demigods. Now, if you see the figure, it resembles pyramids, because layers on layers were built, and then on top of it was the house of the god, because it was believed that gods lived on mountain tops. Does it not give you a recollection of what the original abode of Lord Shiva for the Hindus is? The same, that he lived in the mountains.
Mountains, yes.
So each city, I have already told you, that was ruled by a different god. And you find that the position of the king was enhanced and supported by religion.
Okay.
And each god had control of certain things, and each city, the rulers, what they did, they said that we are only interpreters, and they told the people what the god actually wanted them to do. So if you see layers and layers, and if you see this figure on this is the top of the ziggurat, where you find that at the top again there are stairs, and then inside there is a small room which consisted of the city god. So each city, whether it was Ur, whether it was Uruk, whether it was Mari, they each had their own gods, and they built ziggurats, which was usually in the center of the city. So ziggurats have survived, some part of the palaces have survived, but where the common people lived, that has not survived. And I wanted to show you better pictures of the ziggurat. This is the ziggurat, and if you see that it was first excavated by British archaeologist Wooley in 1923, and it was in very good condition, and you can climb these stairs up to the place where the god is kept.
Out of my curiosity, before you just go forward, Miss Roy, out of my curiosity, I want to ask you, to this ziggurat, were they also confined to the limited amount of population who can go inside it, or was it open for the masses?
No. It was open to all, even women. So, except for the fact that women were not allowed to study.
Okay.
Except for that, everything, it was largely based on democratic principles, the society.
You may please go
we come to Mesopotamian. I have just given two figures of these gods. This was a warrior god, and this has been found in gold figurine. And if you see on the right, this is Marduk, the dragon god. And now we come to the society. Now, the society initially was, of course, less complex, but as the city-states grew up in size, as empires were established, you find the pyramid-like society came into being. It was almost the same in all parts of the world. So you find that the king and the nobility formed the top. They were the most powerful, they had all the power, and you find that monarchical form of government started, and you find that after the death of the king, you find that his son came to power. The second strata was, of course, the priests, because they claimed high status, and they were the ones who actually told the people what they were supposed to do. The third are the scribes. I had mentioned the scribes who used to actually write all documents, because printing was not there. Each and every letter, if there was a letter which the king wanted to write, or if there was a document which had to be preserved, or there was some calculation, or the yearly records of revenues and everything, that was all painstakingly handwritten. And these scribes were given a higher status because they were intellectual people. They had to memorize a lot, and they had to finish that particular tablet before the clay dried. The fourth is the craftsmen and the peasants. They were the ones who were there. So, because this was an urban center, it was a civilization. A civilization has 2-3 important things. One, of course, the language, the script. Also, that there should be surplus production so that the cities can be established. And the people who lived in the cities, they did work other than agriculture. So, which meant that the grains and everything had to be brought into the city. And then the craftsmen were required, the artisans were required, not only to make the tools for writing, for agriculture, also for trade. So you find that the entire level was that of workers, which were most important for any society. The last strata was of slaves, and they were not treated very well. They were not given any kind of freedom, and you find that women had more rights than in many later civilizations. Now we come to, so I've just given you, just to make you understand that how the kings and the priests and how the military commanders eventually became monarch. And dynasty, I've already explained that how, after the death of the king, you find that his son ascended to the throne. Now let us talk about urbanization. Now, in Mesopotamian civilization, there are 3 kinds of towns which have been found. One, cities that developed around temples. We are going to study Ur. Cities that developed as centers of trade. We are going to talk about Mari. We are going to see how the Mari was developed and how it was so important for the Mesopotamian civilization. And the third were the imperial cities where, the kings and the nobles, they lived. But we are going to study in great detail of the first two cities because that is what has been given in your textbooks. Now let us see. Now, although all the cities share the same culture, you find that each city had its own government, rulers, warriors, its own patron god, and functioned like an independent country. So, apart from Ur, Uruk, and Mari, which I have been talking about, there was Kish and Lagesh. And at the center of each city was the temple. This is the ziggurat. And if you see, there are flight of steps towards the first level, then the second level, then the third level, and finally towards the small. If you see, you can notice this is the opening, and this directly led to the place where the idol of the god was kept. Now you see, this is an artist's representation of the Mesopotamian city, and you will see, I will show you more slides when I'm talking about the layout of the city. I will show you the actual condition of the Mesopotamian city of Ur, but first we are going to study Ur.
Before we take this session forward, Ms. Roy, so here the picture which I am seeing, it's a little close to Harappan civilization, I would say. So was it actually planned wise Harappan civilization was an actual planned civilization? How can we compare the two? Were there any similarities in between?
So unfortunately, no similarities in that aspect. Harappan civilization was far superior in its town planning techniques. It was first planned and then executed. Whereas if you look at the down, if you look here, you see the box-like structures of houses. You can barely see any roads. You can barely see any drainage system. And you find that they are all close-knit, and they have also not survived because the area where the common people lived, they were mud brick houses, and they were not made of the burnt bricks which was used in the Harappan civilization. So in fact, Harappan civilization has been coming in news lately, and a lot of excavations are showing that the civilization was carefully planned, and the houses where the common people lived, that was also planned. So you find that here, unfortunately, if you see in the Mesopotamian civilization, that is not there. The palace area, and also no palace has been found in Harappan civilization. So the palace area, this, if you see on the left hand side, this is an aerial image of Ur when this thing was happening. Okay. The excavations was happening. And on the right hand side, you see the bitumen mortar among mud bricks. And let me just go on to the town planning. Now, if you see this, you can make out that this is also not the actual figure. I will show you the actual figure. You can see a box-like structure. You cannot see any drainage system, any roads in between. This is the actual site picture. And if you see, this is a house, and just adjoining, this is a house. So it is very apparent that no carts could pass. If the people wanted some goods, or if they wanted some things, then they had to make use of donkeys or some such animal so that they could load it and then come. Now, this civilization, before I begin, is known as the Bronze Age, because the bronze is an alloy which comes out of an alloy of copper and tin. Now, cities and towns were important places, and it meant that there was surplus production. So for surplus production, granaries and the services had to be provided for. So when we see the Mesopotamian civilization, we see that the city people were not self-sufficient. You find, for example, if there is a carver of stone and he's carving a stone seal, Then he requires bronze tools, he requires colored stones. Now, all this came from many places which was not readily available within the city. So the Mesopotamian cities, the food was not so much of a problem as metals, stones, wood, which was sourced from outside. Now we come to the narrow winding streets. Just see the streets. There are practically no streets, and you find that the town planning and the street drains were practically absent in the city of Ur. And instead of drains, what was found was that clay pipes were found in the inner courtyard of houses. Now, house roofs were sloped inwards. Let me go back and show you this house. If you see, these houses had the roofs, they caved in, and you find that the rainwater was channeled via the drain pipes into sumps in the inner courtyards, and that's how these people got water.
Is
Then
that
you
what we
find,
call rainwater harvesting today? Was it
yes,
that
they were
they were
using,
practicing?
they were. Because remember, I told you that the
Yeah,
cities came up in the desert area, so water was
right.
very, very important for them. Okay, now the people also swept their household refuse into the streets, and this made, over a period of time, when the archaeologists were excavating, they found that the street levels had risen. And the result was that a lot of people, when you enter the house, they increase the threshold so that the refuse, the mud from the drains, from the streets should not enter their houses. Now, let's see the light. Where did the light come from? The light came into the rooms not from windows, but from the doorways which opened into the courtyards. And when they started reading the cuneiform script and when they read the documents, they came to know that the Mesopotamians were superstitious. They were superstitious about especially how the houses were built. And this they came to know through the recorded omen tablets which were found in Ur. So, for example, if the threshold was raised to a lot of extent, this was said to have bring wealth and prosperity to the household. If there was a front door which did not open towards another house, that was considered lucky. But the way these houses have been built, this was probably very difficult to find a house which did not open into the adjoining neighbor's house. Now, if the main door of a house opened outwards, it was said that the wife would be a torment to her own husband. Now let's come to the cemeteries. There were various cemeteries which were found in the city of Ur, and graves of royal people and also of the commoners have been found. Graves of royal were can be easily identified because they were buried with a lot of gold and precious stones and pottery and all the things, whereas commoners were simple graves. But very few individuals have been found buried under the floors of ordinary houses. So, which means that they had a separate place for burying the dead, which means that they had a cemetery system. Now I want to talk to about the importance of the cities. If you see, this is the legend of Gilgamesh. Now he ruled the city of Uruk, not Ur, Uruk, sometime after Enmerkar. And Enmerkar is supposed to have started the practice of writing on clay tablets because he wanted something and he sent a man on horseback. It was very far. The story is given in your book. Maybe you could, after this session, open the story of Enmerkar and see how he started the practice of writing, how he got fed up of sending a person back and forth and he was getting mixed up. Finally, he decided to write it. That's how writing began. Now, in the Mesopotamian culture, cities were extremely important. And if there was a city which was destroyed in war, they recalled it in poetry. And the pride of Mesopotamian about their towns is shown in the epic of Gilgamesh. He had sent an expedition, and his very dear heroic friend died in that expedition. And you find that he was distraught, and he left his kingdom and he went in pursuit of peace. That is, and the legend of Gilgamesh is there in 12 tablets. Okay. Now we come to the next city. I had mentioned that we are going to be studying two cities, the town planning of Ur, and now we will see the city of Murray. Now, if you closely see, the town planning is almost the same, but if you see, it is circular, and if you see beyond this circular, the walls have come up, which means that there were frequent wars, and they were afraid that somebody is going to attack them. So you find that beyond the city limits, if you see in the middle, there is a stream, which is so important. Water is so important for livelihood. And surrounding the city is the pasture area. This is the steppe region. This is the region where actually the people, instead of practicing agriculture, domesticated animals. But this city came up. Why? Because it was very, very much important as far as trade is concerned. I have mentioned before that food grains was not an issue as far as the Mesopotamian cities were concerned, but they needed a host of other things like stones and precious stones, fuel. All this they needed. Now, this is around 2000 BCE that the royal city of Mari flourished. And you find that the Mari was located on the upstream of Euphrates. I've already mentioned that agriculture and animal rearing were carried out in this region, and most of this area was used for pasturing sheep and goats. Now, herders, what are they doing? Initially, they started exchanging animals, cheese, leather, and meat in return for metal tools, etc., with the farmers. Then began the nomadic groups. The nomadic groups of the western desert, they started coming and settling down into the agricultural land. Now, these groups first came as herders, then they came as laborers. Extra labor was required at the time of harvest, and the extra labor was required at the time of sowing also. So you find that they worked as agricultural laborers, they also worked as hired soldiers, and they started settling down. These included the Akkadians, the Amorites, the Assyrians, and the Armenians. Now, the king of Mari were Amorites, and they raised a temple at Mari for Dagon. If you go back to my slides, you can see the god of steppe. I had given the figure of Dagon. Now, Mesopotamian society and culture, they were very open. They were open to different cultures. So you find that a mixed culture led to a very, very good example of urban centered, which actually prospered on trade. Now let us see what is the life in the city of Mari. I had mentioned that wood, things like this is the statue and the seal of Mari. So if the goods were sent from Mari to some other city, this is the seal which was used. And you find that wood, copper, wine, tin, etc. These were actually carried in boats along the Euphrates between Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. So you find that the boats are carrying grinding stones also, wood also, wine, oil jars. In fact, oil jars from Harappan civilization have also been found here. So these boats would stop at Mari, and then they used to proceed towards the southern cities. That's how the township of the pastoral town of Mari came up. Now, the officers also of this town would travel they would go abroad, inspect the cargo. They used to levy a charge of, say, about 1/10 of the total value of goods. And thus you find that the kingdom of Mari was maybe not militarily so strong, but it was extremely prosperous. The people living there were rich because of trade. And the same when you see the life in the city, the same the usually the city life it progressed in the same way. You find that there were slaves, the women were given the equal status. Democratic principles largely were found in these areas. And you find that the Mesopotamian civilization, which was discovered, led to the discovery of other civilizations also around the world. Now we come to the next slide. Now, when we talk about the Mesopotamian civilization and we are talking about the seals, we are talking about the town planning. So where they lacked in town planning, where they lacked in the fact that they did not give total pakka houses to the common people, because the common people houses have not really survived. They were because they were built of mud bricks. Whereas in Harappan civilization, you find that the proper pakka houses have been found, and this is visible to us. So even though you find that the cities were not properly planned, we saw that they were very prosperous. They were prosperous why? Because there was trade. We find that there are schools. We find that there are scribes. The scribes are actually responsible for the writing of so many tablets. Now, when we talk about the legacy of the Mesopotamian civilization, or why is Mesopotamian civilization so very important to us? This was because they had a tradition of time reckoning and mathematics. So you find that in astronomy, in mathematics, in geometry, they were very, very superior. And the developments in these fields were again taken forward by the students who studied in the schools. So you find that, in schools, you find that there were some students who became scribes, who went on to become scribes, and they are the ones who are responsible for writing the wide array of tablets which have been found. But there were some who went on to study and they became intellectuals. They are the ones who are responsible for developments in astronomy, developments in mathematics, development in geometry. Now let us see how. Look at the left tablet, and if you see this has been done by the people who have been studying. So they are reinterpreting the clay tablets which have been found. So the Babylonians, they found that they knew the common rules for measuring volumes and also areas. If you come to the center tablet, this ancient tablet contains root 2 with 99.999% accuracy. So you find that when I talk to you about the students, they are solving all these mathematical puzzles like you. And you find when we come to the last, this tablet talks about the mathematical, geometric, algebra, which is resembling the Pythagorean theorem. Now, apart from these, tablets which are mentioning the multiplication and division tables, square and square root tables, tables of compound interest have also been found. And the students were made to solve these compound interest solutions. So you find that this was an area where the Mesopotamians were very, very superior. Now, apart from this, let's come to astronomy. The division of the year into 12 months, according to the revolution of the moon around the earth, the division of the month into 4 weeks, the day into 24 hours, and the hour into 60 minutes, which we take for granted and in our daily lives. All this has come to us from Mesopotamian civilization. These time divisions. Now, how did we come to know? How did the transmission to the world happen? Because Mesopotamian civilization was lost to the world, and it's only in the 1920s that the excavation of Mesopotamia began. So the answer is that these time divisions were adopted by the successors of Alexander, because it is Alexander who actually took control over this area. And from there, it got transmitted to the Roman world, then to the world of Islam, and then to medieval Europe. So solar and lunar eclipses, when we come to the astronomy part, they noticed the occurrence of the tides. They noticed when the solar and lunar eclipses occurred, and they noted it according to the year, month, and day. All these achievements were possible due to the urban institution of schools. This is where the students read, and there were intellectuals who worked very, very hard. And you find that even though the food resources were abundant in Mesopotamia, and it lacked in stones, it lacked in wood, it lacked in metal, because wood also they used in large numbers. You find that the trade took care of it. With this, we come to the end of the Mesopotamian civilization. This is all there is to learn as far as the Mesopotamian civilization is there. So before we break off, I like to give a quick recap of whatever has been taught. So first, I spoke to you about the geography. I told you how there is in the north there are mountains, then there is a steppe region where the pastoral economy developed. Then you find the south where the silt, the fertile silt was deposited by river Tigris and Euphrates, and you find this is where the city-states came up, and you find that initially each small place had their own city-state. Slowly the empires were set up, and you find in this I spoke to you about Sargon of Akkad, and then I told you about how the Babylonian civilization was established in on river Euphrates. Then I told you about three main cities. One, the city which developed due to trade, that was Mari. This was in the steppe region. This was the pastoral, where they did not depend on agriculture. Neither did the adjoining areas did. This was an area which was largely the pastoralism, the animal husbandry of sheep and goats happened. And you find that this developed into a pastoral trading town. Then we come to Ur, we come to Uruk, and the imperial cities I had spoken to you about, how the palace has been found and how the king and the nobles, which formed the topmost strata of the society, lived. But when we are talking about the town planning, we are studying in detail about Ur, and we discussed about the Mari. In town planning, the narrow winding roads were there. The roads were not equipped where the regular inflow of goods via the cart could happen. Remember, this is the area where there were bullock carts which were actually used in Harappan civilization. Here, probably the donkeys were used in large number to transfer goods through these narrow winding lanes. Now, another important thing which I told you about was that there you don't find any drainage system. A proper drainage system is not found, and you find that through the courtyard. A similar courtyard you will find even in the Harappan civilization when you study in class 12th. And you find that the pipes were connected and rainwater was accumulated. It came into the houses, and whatever was left was thrown out. Next, I talked to you about Mari, which was a trading town, and you find that how these herders, they played a major role in establishing a proper city state. And here you find that these herders, they initially came, they are exchanging goods which they had in return for food and in return for metal, bronze bronze tools. And later on they started being used as places, as soldiers, as agricultural laborers. And you find that each city state which came up, they had their own god. The god's ziggurat was built. It resembles pyramids to a very, very large extent. And they believed that God lived in mountaintops. So that is why, if the mountains could not be found, they built on top of the ziggurat. It was a very small room, and you had to climb quite high to reach it. Next, I told you about the society where the kings and the nobles, they formed the topmost. And then came the priests. Then came the scribes which were responsible for writing seals. Imagine how many seals and what kind of uh, experience and intellectual ability these scribes needed to be able to finish the entire tablet before it dried. Then it was, of course, baked and it became hard. It became hard, and that's why we have found so many tablets. Then I spoke to you about the craftspersons, the peasants, basically the agriculturists and the work people who who formed the base, and they were the ones who were actually giving the money to the kings. Then we come to the last strata. The last strata were the slaves. So these were slaves which were taken when one city state became victorious over another city state. And you find that these slaves were not treated well. Otherwise, if you see, largely democratic principles were established, and you find that so much of this thing was not there. The societal divisions were not there, even though the king and of course, the nobles lived in palaces. Then I uh, I talked to you about the trade, and I also spoke to you about how the people traded for metals, they traded for wood, and they went far and wide. They went, so this is present day Iraq. They went to Iran, they went to Turkey, they came to India, and you find that whatever they needed by boats, these came. The last thing which I told you about was the legacy of the Mesopotamian civilization. Here I talked about their astronomical, their mathematical, their the developments in geometry, and how it was carried on to the Alexander. Alexander then carried it forward to the Roman Empire. Roman Empire then carried it to the Islamic Empire, because after the Roman Empire came to an end, the third major empire which was established was the Islamic Empire, which included parts of Asia and Europe, and it was based in the Midwest. Now we come to and then later on it was spread towards Europe. So you find that their their rules for measuring volumes and areas, their Pythagoras theorem, their understanding of astronomy, their understanding of the day and how the day was divided. That is what is very, very important. The things which we take for granted. All this has come from Mesopotamia to the world. And you find that this could continue. Why? Because there were schools where the students went and studied. Fortunately, we have been able to uh, identify, and we have been able to decipher the script, so we know exactly how much the students were made to solve the mathematical principles, the geometry principles, and how their concept of the tides led to the
Right.
solar and the lunar.
Miss Roy,
This thing. Yes.
initially when you began, you said that females, the women were a little, kept behind to take education and to be part of the system. Yet the
Yes.
legacy of Mesopotamian civilization is famous worldwide. So were the
Yes.
girls actually allowed to be in these schools for study or not?
So we have as yet not found any evidence where the girls went to school to study per se. This is
Okay.
something which has not been found, and that is why I mentioned that the women were not really allowed to study. But it's not as if when we come to the family system, it was largely a nuclear family, but adult sons did live with their parents, and you find the marriage system, the woman, both the sides, the groom side and the bride side, the gifts which they gave, the woman was allowed to give those gifts to
Okay.
with herself. And you find that the patriarchal system was there. You find that the word of the man was important, and you find that there are instances where in order to make the children behave or to make them understand, you find that there are tablets which show that the father has given extreme punishment to the students.
Okay. So we
Yes.
could, see the footprints of patriarchy also since then, as you said.
Yes, we do see footprints of patriarchal system where
Right.
the head was the father. Yes.
Ms. Roy, last 2 minutes for this session to be ended. I would request you to please wrap up the session.
Okay, so I have already given a short summary of the chapter. I have also explained the society, the family, the town planning. Now, there are two traditions which are the last two paragraphs which are given in the book, which talks about a library actually in existence. That is very incredible. So, which meant that the students could go up and read from the library. So that's how the intellectual ability of the students increased. And you find that it is remarkable that the students were able to build on their predecessors, and they were able to give to the world the tradition of time reckoning and mathematics. So, trade, very important, urban cities in place, script is there, it has been deciphered, the cuneiform script. I have also spoken about the seals which were used for trading. And I have also told you that how the trade happened between Mesopotamia towards its neighboring nations, and and most importantly, the trade with a parallel civilization, Harappan civilization. And oil jars are coming. You find that wood, metals are being brought into the Mesopotamian civilization. And I have discussed the legacy of the Mesopotamian civilization. I hope this session finds you find it interesting, because
Indeed,
I have
indeed.
tried to.
It was very interesting, very
Thank you so much.
elaborated session. I would say a very detailed discussion on Mesopotamian civilization. And I really
Thank you so
thank
much.
you, Ms. Roy, for joining us time to time in enhancing our resource material. Thanks
Thank
for
you very
joining us
much. Thank
today
you.
as well.
Thank you.
So this was history session for you viewers, and I would like to remind you here that academic session for 2023 and 24 has already begun. And if you wish to read NCERT's textbooks, then you can simply come and buy from New Delhi Book Publication Division Department. And these bookstores are also available in Bangalore, Kolkata, Ahmedabad and Guwahati. And the timing for these publication divisions will be 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. If you wish to order all these books online, you can log into NCERT's official website, and there you can place the order. You'll be getting all these books right at your doorstep without any delivery charge. And for the bookstores, the timing, as I have said, 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. and they will be opened on all gazetted holidays as well, on Saturdays, Sundays as well. And if you wish to read the PDF version of NCERT's textbooks, then you may kindly download the mobile applications of ePathshala, Diksha and NCERT. And on NCERT's website also, all the PDF version of textbooks are available. So this was history session. Next we are coming up with economics session for standard 12 students on channel number 12. Remain connected to CIT NCERT. This was a history session for you. Thank you. Namaskar.